This is the actual news. Easy listening for the end of the world. All week, I listen to the news. I take out the parts that I don't think you really have to hear, and then I deliver them to you in a 15-minute podcast. It's often difficult to figure out what news is important to listen to and what news truly is just designed to make you feel angry or mad or scared. It's one of those weeks where there actually is a lot of things that I could talk to you about. I'm going to go ahead and just sort of summarize that it seems like it's not necessarily the end of the world, but perhaps just the end of the world as we know it. And of course, history rhymes in a lot of ways. It's not like we've never seen this sort of behavior from people. It's not like societies have never gotten to this point before. Some of it feels pretty reminiscent to the way that people talk about the end of empires. You know, the end of Dutch Empire, the British Empire, and some would now say the American Empire are sort of similar in some ways. Like I said, every week I watch the news, I absorb this 24-hour cycle. I then try to condense it for you. And this week, I figured for most of the week that I would talk about some of the protests that are happening and Trump and the federal government's response to those. And then later in the week, we had a certain foreign country attack another foreign country. And I realized, okay, I'm going to have to talk about both of these things. And then after that, we had a full on political assassination. So this is not one of those weeks where it's the media who cried wolf, which is a real problem because sometimes there's stuff going on that doesn't matter, but they have to constantly make you think that there is 24 hours of news going on. Otherwise, you're not engaged. And the way that, you know, a cable news station or really just any sort of legacy media platform makes money is eyeballs, right? I mean, if you're watching cable, there is commercials between news stories, and they need to keep the news stories engaging so that you'll watch the commercials, so the advertisers will then pay the news stations. And it's essentially the same format for online news. And then you've got the social media influencers and random people online who need to also keep you engaged. And that's either sell advertising or even just to have more people logged into a certain app because the applications make money based on how many people are using the app and for how much time. So, really, I suppose a good way to put it would be that they're not after your money necessarily, they're after your attention. And so, if you'd prefer, you could give it to me for about 15 minutes. I say 15, sometimes we do 10, sometimes we do 20. So let's jump into it. The protests that are happening basically start off in Los Angeles. There were some other ones going on. Look, they're generally just protests of the Trump administration. There are different specified reasons. So in LA, this is more specifically about immigration. Obviously, that's a state that is being hit hard with Trump's immigration policy. The interesting thing that I saw mostly from it is not the protest itself, which you would basically expect to be going on. It's more so the public's reaction to it, which is important because these came about. Trump promises, hey, there are all these dangerous criminals. They are doing a bunch of crazy crimes, and we got to get them out of the country. And as soon as I get into the office, that is what we are going to do. Trump gets into office, he starts off this immigration policy. We see some cases where people are getting deported even because, you know, they didn't do anything and they're not even here illegally. Some people just sort of match the description of someone that is here illegally, and that is good enough for Trump and Stephen Miller anyway. Stephen Miller being essentially the guy that's calling the shots for the immigration policy. So they promise we're going to remove a bunch of dangerous criminals. As it turns out, it's not like there's none. It's not like I'm totally anti any sort of deportation. I think if you're a fucking evil person, we don't want you here. But as it turns out, every single undocumented immigrant is not an evil criminal. Who could imagine? So the Trump administration, regardless, decides to send in, like, basically SWAT teams, right? They send in ICE. These guys are not always even identifying themselves. So they're sort of loosely jumping into these situations where they're grabbing people who are in the US and are often not documented and just yanking them and throwing them into a white van. If you were to ask most Americans if they want to get rid of undocumented immigrants who have committed crimes, most Americans would say yes. However, if you ask most Americans if they want to get rid of undocumented immigrants that are doing jobs that citizens don't even really want and they're a net benefit to our society, they would say no. And guess what? We are getting rid of people like that. So in Los Angeles, there's a protest for that. The protest that is depicted by the media is one of a riot, right? And the media is going to say that Los Angeles is burning to the ground. There's actually like an AI video of a riot in Los Angeles that went viral because that's, again, good enough for some people now. The governor, Gavin Newsom, who, like, I am not a fan of, but has done a pretty decent job of pointing out how poorly this is being handled on a federal level, says this shit is under control. Please don't send in the National Guard. Trump decides to send in the National Guard. Largely, this seems to be because of theater, really. Trump is Trump's big strength in terms of perception is that he seems to a lot of people like a deal maker, like a businessman, and a lot of people associate that identity he has with how the economy was 6, 7 years ago now. In 2016, the economy was a lot better than it is currently, and certainly it was better than it was during Biden's administration. So now his economic policies, the tariffs, etc., which we've talked about in detail in past episodes, it's not going well. You'll see prices of some things down a little bit, but many businesses just sort of getting fucked over by tariffs, shortages probably incoming still. And not to mention, like, he's just flip flopped on everything. So even if you're trying to build leverage against the country by using tariffs, it's not working if one day you're doing them and the next day you're not. So Trump sends in the National Guard to, handle these evil protesters, and Newsom is just saying you're choosing theater over truly handling this in a way that makes sense. So Trump's immigration policy right now is not actively handling criminals. It's just finding people who are technically undocumented, being as aggressive as possible. And that doesn't necessarily mean a benefit for anybody. I know that a lot of people's perception, again, perception, is that the less immigrants we have, the more money citizens will have. And I just need to stress that once again, no. Just because you cut down pieces of the federal government with Elon Musk, just because you get rid of undocumented immigrants, just because you get rid of programs that Republicans tell you are bad, does not mean there's going to be more money in your pocket. It often means that these services are then overtaken by private businesses, by private equity, and you're still left with the shitty amount of money and resources you had at the beginning. And that's not to sit here and try to lecture people that the Democrats are better. They're kind of mostly sitting on their fucking thumbs and just going, we don't know if this is the correct time to stand up for ourselves. And like, you can see why a lot of these centrist Democrats, even now, are more hated than the Republicans, right? You have Zoran in New York City. He's running for mayor. His opponents are, I mean, mainly centrist Democrats, including Andrew Cuomo, the former governor. And there are polls showing Zoran, this guy that's 33, and I don't know if he says he's a socialist, but is very, very strongly progressive. He's popular. Meanwhile, people are like, fuck Cuomo. I'll vote for Trump over Cuomo because, and I'll leave you with this for today. People are desperate right now. If your economic position specifically is not, that's great. But in general, people are desperate right now and they want to do something. They want to do something. If you tell them, no, no, America is already great and fine how it is, they're going to tell you to go fuck yourself. If you tell them, hey, I'm really going to do something about this, I'm going to build a collective community of working class people that are going to rise up and are going to engage with solutions that have worked in the past. You know, we had a Great Depression in the 1930s, and we were able to work our way out of that with very specific policies that were progressive, called the New Deal. And that brought about the greatest middle class the world has ever seen. And many baby boomers that grew up in that middle class don't understand what came before them. And so now they're going with this other philosophy, which is we need to do something, but we're mostly going to cut down the idea of community. We think that any sort of public program is going to weaken incentives for people to work hard, and people need to be tougher. And that philosophy has existed prior. Even tariffs specifically were used prior, and those really didn't work out for us very well. So, look, we're going to see how the public responds. I am going to say that getting rid of undocumented immigrants in mass is not going to be effective to help the economy. I am going to say that shutting down protests is not going to help us in any feasible way. But I'm not going to say that that's not how much of the country's going to feel. If you look at, the Black Lives Matter protests in 2020, a hell of a lot of people watched the news. The news told them these are riots, they're burning down the cities, and they believed that, and they still do believe that. And if you communicate to people that not only these immigration protests in LA, but there were protests in many other cities called the No King protests, if you say, hey, these were out of hand, these were crazy people who were not just exercising their First Amendment rights, these were people that are trying to basically become a mob and destroy our country, a lot of people, unfortunately, are probably going to believe that. And if Trump is able to get enough people to believe that, then they'll continue cheering that on, and he won't have to improve the economy because he, in hand with legacy media, will simply make people feel scared that things could get even worse. And they'll cling to what many people would describe as fascism. A lot of people will say that an idea like communism or socialism never worked. And in a lot of ways, I would agree with them. But I suppose what I would ask them now is that when your leaders are full on lying to you, when they are demonizing any person that's from another country, and when they are basically trying to say we need to do what we need to do and the ends will justify the means, that is characterized in many ways as fascism. And hey, has fascism ever worked? Communism has never worked. Okay, has fascism ever worked? I would invite you to give me an example of that. Anyway, that's going to be all for this week. I will jump into these foreign countries attacking other foreign countries and sort of the geopolitics of that. I would like to see how it develops a little bit first before we start talking about, Uncle Izzy and Aunt Pal. Shows in Boston were awesome this week. Thank you so much to everyone that came out. I am in Denver at Sushi High on Thursday, June 19th. I'm at Aquatic Brewing in Falmouth down on Cape Cod in Massachusetts on June 28th. And then some good shows coming up for the rest of the summer as well. So I'll see you there. If you haven't seen my new special, it's on my stand up channel and it is called Dead and Alive. And some good feedback has come from that as well. So I thank you very much for listening to the podcast. I thank you very much for watching me and supporting me in general. And we are off next week because I'll be in Denver still, but the following week we'll see you. Thanks very much.